Get the lighting just right. Lighting just right.
We already cued the theme music.
Part of his agent's request.
Where's my honeydew and cantaloupe? Cut in 2-inch.
All I know
squares.
is we're not allowed to look you in the eye. I thought.
Yeah. How you guys doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to have you here in studio. STLtoday.com and with us every Tuesday and Thursday. You wrote an interesting article about the Penny Hubbard race that is, I guess it's going to, Friday's the new election day?
Friday, unless the appeals court does something, I think, unexpected, then voters in the 78th House District will go to the polls again Friday and have another vote and see if Penny Hubbard wins again over upstart Bruce Franks or if Bruce Franks pulls it off.
And if you vote absentee, make sure you put it in an envelope.
Put it in an envelope. Do follow the state law.
Follow the state law. You have an interesting story about following the money with this whole case.
Well, what was interesting, I write a lot about campaign finance.
Yeah.
So to me, when a campaign like this gets really interesting and lots of powerful people are taking sides, there's usually money behind it. So
right.
I go to campaign finance records. So a week or so ago, I wrote a column about how the Fifth Ward Committee that the Hubbards control was funneling some money into Penny Hubbard's committee, and I found that interesting. And one of the things that I noted was that some statewide Democrats were donating to the Fifth Ward Committee, and then some of that money was apparently ending up in Penny Hubbard's committee. Well, I got a call after that column from one of the statewide candidates that I mentioned, Judy Baker, who's running for treasurer, and she says there's a mistake in the column.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I don't think so. And she says, well, I didn't give $500 to the Fifth Ward Committee. Well, the Fifth Ward Committee shows Judy Baker giving $500. And so I asked her what happened, and she said, I put a stop check on that payment. So that's what this column was about. It was a follow-up to the other one. And basically she says, I put a stop check on the payment because I had questions about how they were going to spend the money. It's $500. It's not a lot of money, but it's, to me, awfully interesting when you have a race like this locally in which a lot of questions are being raised about how a specific political family is spending their money, that a statewide candidate rethought their decision to be connected to that political family financially.
Right.
And so
some cracks in the foundation there.
Made a decision not to spend that money, and so to me, campaign finance records are interesting. I don't know that those details filter down to voters, but
right.
When people are moving money around from committees, they're usually trying to hide the source of whoever's actually supporting them. And I find that interesting because I think that gets in the way of our democracy working properly.
I think people think a pox upon both their houses. I think they think everyone's dirty, everyone's funneling money back and forth. What's your gut tell you about this race on Friday? Does Franks have a shot?
I think he's got a shot. I still will not be surprised if Hubbard wins again. You're talking about a very short election cycle, and I think Franks voters are probably more motivated.
Right.
But the Hubbard machine, there's a reason they call it a machine.
Right.
They've been winning elections in that district for a long time. And so they're good at getting people out to vote. And people have been voting for Hubbards for, there's 2 or 3 generations of Hubbards now that have various elected positions, from Tamika on the
right.
Council to Rodney Sr. and Penny and Rodney Jr. So I think that they have the advantage going in. The shortened cycle actually works against Franks, I think, but his voters seem to be very motivated. And so, and on election day, the last time, the Franks voters actually won on election day. They lost on the absentee.
Right.
So I think it's going to be close either way. Won't really be surprised if it goes one way or the other.
But now there's those questions, that people may have in the back of their minds, voters, that may work in Franks.
Yeah, if there are Hubbard voters who are offended by what they've read in the Post-Dispatch or seen in court or followed in the media over the last couple of weeks, and some of those voters either decide not to vote for the Hubbard, switch to Franks, that'll have an effect on the election. I don't know whether or not in this shortened time frame that'll make that much of a difference, but either way, it was a very close vote the first time. It's going to be very close. It could go one way or another.
Speaking of close votes, she was the vote that protected Doe Run from some litigation legislation, and then 3 days later, her son's hired by Doe Run. So a lot of people are like, well, who cares about this one race in the city? But one vote can affect all sorts of things all around the state.
One vote in the House and in the Senate can affect a whole lot of things. The veto session, the annual veto session, starts on Wednesday, and it was at the veto session a few years ago when Hubbard made that key vote. And the reason her vote is significant is that during the session she voted against Doe Run being protected, being capped from lawsuits over poisoning children with lead.
Right.
And then she flipped after her son was hired as a lobbyist. Now, of course, at the time, I reported on it at the time, family said, oh, there's purely coincidence that happened.
Also, isn't the attorney for Doe Run also the attorney for the Penny Hubbard
Jane
campaign?
Duker, at least she was the attorney for Doe Run. I don't know if she is still an attorney for Doe Run, but at the time that vote took place, Jane Duker was an attorney for Doe Run, and now she's representing Penny Hubbard in this case.
How come no one's made a stink except for me over the fact that one of the polling places in the 78th district is at the Hubbard Rec Center with a giant Hubbard sign as you go in to vote?
That's not entirely uncommon in this city, actually, that sort of thing. I mean, I'm amazed sometimes at where some polling places actually are, but that's what this. The interesting thing about this story that it's raised to me beyond the individuals involved is it shined a light a little bit on historically how street politics work in the city of St. Louis. And it's because powerful people know that at the very grassroots level, who's elected makes a difference.
Well, and don't talk about disenfranchising voters when there's a whole lot of disenfranchising of voters going on all around the place.
Well, the idea, this is the thing that bothers me the most about Duker's argument. It's one thing to defend your client, and that's an appropriate thing for an attorney to do. The argument that a new election disenfranchises voters, to me, is a little bit disingenuous, because anybody who had an opportunity to vote is going to have an opportunity to vote again. Now, again, it's a shortened cycle, and I get that, but there's not a whole lot of dispute that the law wasn't followed during the first election. There's questions over whether or not people voted fraudulently over the absentee, but there's not a lot of dispute that the law wasn't followed.
What do you think about Lacey Clay writing to Loretta Lynch?
As I wrote in my column, I don't understand exactly where Lacey's coming from here, because I say bring the Justice Department on. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the idea, in fact, there was testimony in court that the Justice Department is already looking at this thing, but I don't know that they're looking at it from the standpoint that Lacey's interested in. I think they're looking at the fact that there are some serious questions over whether or not the absentee law was violated and whether or not the process to gain absentee votes was pushing up against the law in some capacity. So, we know there's a grand jury investigation. That was there was testimony in court about that. And we're told that the feds, that Jennifer Joyce asked the feds to look into it too. So they're going to look into this. We may be talking about this story for another year or so, regardless of what happens on Friday.
And remember, though, this judge was just to determine whether or not we needed a new election.
Right.
He wasn't checking on somebody was cheating or someone doing something illegal. He just wanted to know if we needed a new election.
Right. The court case was very focused on how the absentee votes were handled at the election board.
Right.
Because that's all that Bruce Frank's attorney, David Rowland, needed to do.
Right.
All he needed to do was prove, hey, you know what? The law was violated. Give me a new election. Mm-hmm. And that was handled fairly clearly. I would guess the appeals court is going to sustain Rex Burleson's decision. We're going to have a new election, but the investigations are going to be going on long after whatever happens Friday happens.
Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch columnist, contributor here at the Big 550 KTRS. Have a good week.
Thanks, you too.
Go Broncos, by the way, huh?
Hey, 1-0, baby.
How about that? 729, Big 550 KTRS. Let me tell you about Harry's Razors, because Harry's